All right, it's 2 minutes after 12, so I am going to get started. We have a guest speaker today, so your conversation with me will be fairly brief, and then I will hand it over to Sean and Jackie from Scott and Stewart Forestry. For those of you who are potentially new to our lunch break sessions, these are a monthly occurrence. We do our lunch break webinars usually on the last Tuesday or Wednesday of every month, and they're always over the noon hour, so you can pop in anytime during your lunch break if you're able, or if it's a rainy day and you're out in the field, feel free to pop in. But for those of you who are potentially busy during that time, we also record them, and you can find them on our YouTube page, as well as vocally through our audio on the podcast, Real Trees, Real Talk. So there's a kind of a variety of different options to actually access this information, but if you're here today, then you're seeing it firsthand. So this is our first recording of it. So today's session is small scale nursery. This was a recommended topic, so we've had a lot of interest from growers express trying to get a head start on growing some seed, and we all know we've got a huge shortage of seedlings across the province, so I think this topic is particularly timely, and we called in the experts today to speak with us. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and you'll see Sean and Jackie there in a little window in the corner. They're going to take over and do a little bit of an introduction of what it is they work on and give us some of their tips. So I think they're the best people to walk us through this. So thank you, Sean and Jackie, for being here.
Anyway, thank you for letting us be with you during your lunch break. So we were asked a couple of times by Jillian if we wouldn't come and talk a little bit about some of our nursery practices and how they might apply to small scale nursery. And when we think about small scale nurseries, we're kind of thinking maybe you have a little greenhouse in your backyard, or you might have a garden for a seed bed or something like that. So what we're going to do today is go through some of our practices, and like I say, most of them can be applied to small scale nursery. Now, if I do this right, I should be able to. Yeah, so just a little introduction to us for folks that don't know us. Our nursery is owned by Scott and Stewart Forestry. The company started in 1985, and we basically provide silviculture services and harvesting services in the forest industry for mostly woodlot owners in the northeast of the province, but we do find our crews end up going farther abroad than that. What attaches us to the Christmas tree world a little bit are two things. Number one is we do grow Christmas trees on about 200 acres of woodland that we have. And as well, our nursery produces quite a bit of balsam fir and other fir species. So that's our attachment to the Christmas tree industry. Where we grow those seedlings is in a nursery located in St. Andrews, Antigonish County, and we started ourselves. We bought the nursery in 1993, and we produce about 3 or 4 million trees, depending on the year. Most of those trees are spruce, but we are ramping up very quickly to grow more and more fir. So that's the position we come to you today. We're very fortunate at our nursery that we have Jackie with us. That's our grower, and she's probably one of the more experienced growers with fir in the province right now. She's been growing fir for quite a while, and Jackie comes to us with she has diplomas in agriculture, and her specialty is in plant science. And then myself, my background is I'm a forester, graduated from UMB, and I've been kind of very attached to Scott and Stewart Forestry since the beginning. So that's a little bit about us. Jillian asked us what experience did we have growing fir. We have about 25 years experience. We had small amounts in the early years. We pushed that up, and then there was one point there where growers weren't buying any fir at all, and now we're in a race to satisfy the demand, and we're growing more fir all the time. This year we had 700,000 fir in our nursery. So Jay talked a little bit about the shortage that's out there for seedlings. I think the nurseries are going to catch up here shortly. I know we are planning to seed more next year, and I know there's another nursery or two that's going to seed a fair amount of fir. So you're going to see the bigger nurseries catch up, but that shouldn't take away from you folks thinking about growing a few in your backyard if you have the time. I'm going to let Jackie talk a little bit about what fir we grow in our nursery here, and then we'll get on to going through some of our practices.
I'm gonna pull myself up here. Yeah, so as Sean has just said, we've been growing fir for a long time. We've ramped up over the last number of years due to the demand. So usually what happens is we're kind of, the demand is high one year and it takes us a while to catch up. But it's just been growing so much that we're just in the process of catching up on the demand now. We grow the majority of the Christmas tree seedlings that I grow are balsam fir, but I also grow Fraser fir, smaller amounts of Douglas fir, Grand fir, Nordman fir. I've grown some Korean fir in the past, but I haven't grown it in the last maybe 2 or 3 years. So
thanks, Jackie. So today we plan to cover a few things, and hopefully we have time to do that. We plan to talk a little bit about collecting seed. We're going to talk a little bit about if you're thinking about growing your own seedlings, you got to think a little bit about the systems that you'll use. We'll talk a little bit about the infrastructure you need. We'll talk about seeding and germination, which is a very important part in the process. Jackie's going to spend a little time talking to you about nutrition. And then we'll talk a bit about our cultural practices. And if we still have time at the end, we might talk a little bit about planting the trees. So that's hopefully what we'll cover here in the next 30 or 40 minutes, and then allow a little time for questions. So I can't see my whole slide here. Just a sec, I'm going to minimize this a little bit. So just if you're thinking, this is all about possibly planting the seed in your mind about growing your own seedlings. So if you're thinking about growing your own seedlings, a few things you have to consider before you jump into it. Number one, it takes a fair amount of time, but so you got to think about that. Do you have the time? If you're growing seedlings, especially under cover, in a greenhouse setting, you can't basically seed them out and look at them for a little bit, monitor, and then go away on vacation for 2 weeks and come back. You won't like what you see. So you got to think about that a little bit, that you have the time and can stay with it. Have to have patience if you're going to grow your own little seedlings. I'll tell you, most nursery growers will say in the first few years that they grow trees, they probably kill more than they grow. So you got to have some patience. Things don't always work out real early, but if you got some patience and carry on, you'll probably have some success at it. And like I say, I just mentioned that we're going to talk a fair amount about growing under cover today. And if you do that, things happen very fast. It's at certain points of the year that the seedlings grow in a centimeter a week. So things can happen and you got to be on it. And of course, if you're going to get into growing any type, any crop, certainly Christmas trees is no different. You're going to have to invest some money on things to get started. But that all being said, if you're real passionate about it, and you certainly can grow seedlings. It's not rocket science. It just needs a lot of attention. And we will throw out that if you ever get into it a little bit and you need some advice or something went wrong and you need somebody to talk to, certainly Jay or ourselves would certainly be more than willing to help a little bit. The other little thing before I go on, I just don't want to forget from mentioning it, is Jackie here has become a pretty good expert on greenhouses and stuff. So if she actually distributes some, so if you ever are looking for that type of stuff, you can give her a call. So where do we start if we want to grow seedlings? We certainly want to, it all starts with the seed, right? We got to go get some seed. There's 2 places we get our seed. Of course, we use a lot of seed. So one of the big places we go is there's seed banks in all, or so not all, 3 of the provinces, and we draw from all those 3. And you can buy seed from those folks. It's orchard seed. It tends to have better germination than wild seed. So the seed, because it's orchard seed, it's come from selected trees that are all kind of pollinating each other, and so it's good seed. It's priced by the kilo, and I'm not going to get into prices. If you're interested in buying some, you can certainly call. those provincial nurseries. And beauty about seed that comes from these folks is the seed comes very clean. And of course, that's very important to us who use mechanical seeders. Not so as important if you're just hand seeding, which you might do as a Christmas tree grower growing some seedlings. Probably where a lot of your thoughts are is you'd like to collect it on your own. We do that. We do collect our own seed at some points, but we just can't collect enough. That's why we got to buy from these other folks. So we're going to talk a little bit about collecting on your own. So a little bit, I'll go through this and then Jackie will take it over how we clean it and that sort of stuff. So where should you collect seed? Obviously you want to collect seed from good mothers. So those are the good trees you see out there. We don't know who the father is, but you certainly just don't want to go out collecting seed from some harvesting operation, woods harvesting operations that's harvesting balsam fir. You want to make sure you're collecting it from good mothers. And how do you collect it? Well, you can't collect balsam fir seed unless you climb or get up in the air. Some of you folks may know that balsam fir cone never falls to the ground like some other cones do. So we have to climb to get balsam fir seed. Because what happens with balsam or with any fir that I think, what happens is the cone actually breaks up on the tree and the wind distributes the seed across the ground, right? So you won't find very many balsam fir cones on the ground. So you got to climb. You can climb with ladders. We use bucket trucks some to get our seed, or if you don't mind cutting the branches off, you can use pole cutters to knock some cones down, which you can get the cones. So you basically pull the cones or cut the cones off the branches. We use planting bags that we plant our trees in. We use planting bags to go up in the tree and get the cones, and we fill those planting bags, and then we transfer those cones to burlap bags. And that's because as soon as we get them off, we want the air to get at them and start drying them. So we transfer those to burlap bags, which you can buy at your local feed stores or wherever. We get a lot of questions, when do you collect bulk, or let's say balsam fir cones? And one time we used to be a little later than the year. I think climate change maybe making things a little earlier, but we start looking about mid-August. You don't want to start looking any later than that these days. So we start looking in mid-August. And folks that do collect cones at different times, depending on their preference. Where we like to collect the cones is when we can start to see the cone, some of the cones on the tree starting to open a bit. If you collect too early, you might not get the viability of the seed that you're looking for. So we don't start collecting until we start to see some of the cones open up a little bit. And if you're real sharp, there's a slight color change. It moves from kind of a purpley cone to a browner cone, but that's not really what we look at as much. We look at when they start to open a little bit. Some growers, some guys that collect seed have very good success with waiting till the cone is just about ready to fall off the tree or disintegrate on the tree. They collect it very late, still have good success. So there is a window in there, but because we collect a lot of it, we like to start as soon as we see a few of the cones opening up. And I just got to note there, not too early. If you get too early at it, you won't be real happy with your results. And I mentioned some growers collect late. So let's get into cleaning your seed, and Jackie's going to jump in here to talk a bit about that. Before we do, because we collect a lot of seed, we send it to the King's Clear Seed Center in New Brunswick, and they do an excellent job in cleaning seed. And what we get back is very good clean seed that we can put in our seeders and mechanical seeders. But if you're cleaning it, you have to have a fair amount of seed for that to send up there, but you could call them, and that's in King's Clear, New Brunswick, the Seed Center. If you're cleaning it yourself, I'm going to let Jackie basically take us from here on this.
So with the cleaning of the seed, we're going to have it, once it's picked, as Sean said, it's going to go into burlap bags. So then we take the seed and we dry it in an area with other fans, something with good airflow. Then once it's clean, the cones are breaking apart inside the bag. You just make sure you shake them up every now and then. And then what you do is what I was doing when I was cleaning is then I would kind of dump them out and start the process of screening them. So you would simply use different size screens just to start to try to get the seed as clean as possible, down to where you get a real fine screen where you just screen all the dirt off the seed, and what's left is what you're going to utilize. Anyways, it's a simplified version, but that's essentially what I've done for cleaning seed in the past. The reason why we like to use a seed center like Kingsclear to clean our seed is the simple fact that we have a mechanical seeder that can handle any dirt or dust whatsoever, and it can make the process very difficult if we're trying to seed with a mechanical seeder. So if you're going to do your own seeding by hand, cleaning the seed that way would work just fine. It's just because of our mechanical seeder and the fact that we seed so many, is a difficult thing for us to do with that. So go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So from the clean seed, whether we get it in from Kingsclear or any of these other places where we might purchase it, or our own, we then kind of put the seed in the freezer and to get it ready for the season, the next season that we're going to use it. So essentially we store it in a nice cold, dry area to make sure that no moisture is in the bag because it'll mold. And then I take it out, the next one about. I'll take it out a couple of months before I have to seed to start the process of stratification. Some nurseries with balsam fir seed, what they do is they seed in the fall and they put their seed out into an area that's somewhat protected from birds and mice and other things. And the seed will naturally stratify through the winter with cold and warm and freezing and everything else. So that's what some growers do. All I try to do is control it in our area, and I do it over a 60-day period where I simply just take the seed and I'll take it out of the freezer, I'll wet it down, and then I'll go through a process of freezing and thawing and warm to try to get it to be ready to germinate quicker and more evenly in the spring. One of the problems with balsam fir or any of the fir is they tend to germinate over a longer period of time, and we'll get to that.
Yeah, just so if you're doing it yourself, just a reminder there what Jackie just went through. So if you collect your seed, first thing you want to do, or collect your cones, first thing you want to do is dry them so that they'll break up. Once you got them, you can use we use a jiffy tray to start. We just ground the big stuff out of it, and then you can go to a lesser screen to get the dirt out of it, and then you should have some seed that you can hand out. Stratification, which is Jackie uses, you don't have to stratify. You can seed those seeds out if you want, but stratification is a way to increase your viability, and all we're trying to do is mimic nature, because freezing and thawing, if you think of a seed falling on the ground, it first falls on the ground, it gets wet, then it goes through late fall, freezing and thawing, then it goes through the winter, freezing, and then it comes back out, freezing and thawing, and then it germinates, right? So by using the fridges and the freezers, you can mimic that. So that's what stratification is. We're just trying to mimic nature a bit. So we're going to talk about germination in a little bit, but before we do that, if you are going to get into your own growing, a few things you have to consider and think about and make decisions on. Number one is what type of system you might use. Some folks on the call might remember the old bare root systems. Worked well. You use seed beds and transplant beds, and you basically grew a nice big 2-1 or 2+2 stock. We haven't used seed beds since I've been around, so we're not going to talk a lot about that. There is some good information in the grower's manual on that. We had been asked to update that, and we tried to update it. And by talking to folks that did that back 25 years ago, but there is probably some people on the call that might even be doing it now. But anyway, the bare root system is an excellent system. The only challenge is getting little seedlings to grow for you in the seed beds, because you're growing outside in the soil and there's lots of little things that want to come at you and get your seedlings. So it's a tough time. And if you talk to growers that did that back 30 years ago, that's what you'll hear. The seed beds were the challenge. So we're not going to talk a lot about that, because I think what we'll do is, if you're a grower wanting to grow seedlings, I think there's a bit of a better way here, and we'll go over that. So the second system is the containerized system. So you basically grow in containers in a heated house, or in a house. Heat can come from the sun. You can use cold frames, but you would use a containerized system. And if you even grew just a little seedling, you could jump back in the bare root system and put those little seedlings out into transplant beds, and you would be able to actually grow a bare root seedling. And we do that. And the only reason I put those pictures up is that's our transplant beds being put in. So we basically start the seedling in a greenhouse, then we take it out and we line it out in transplant beds. And then those trees go to our Christmas tree lots. We don't sell those trees, but you could certainly do that on your own. So you could go to a nursery and use the hybrid system and buy a little seedling, get a good price on it, and go out and transplant it if you wanted a big transplant seedling. So before you get into growing seedlings yourselves, you've got to give some thought to the system you're going to use. And I guess if I was a Christmas tree grower going to do it, I'd probably go with the hybrid system. I'd somehow get little plugs started, and then I'd put them out into the transplant beds. So if we're starting to narrow in on using a greenhouse, here's some stuff you'll have to invest in to get it. You'll have to invest in a greenhouse, which is a small greenhouse. You'll have to think about a watering system. We use overhead watering systems, and you see them dangling down on that picture up on the left. We also buy lots of pallets because we want to put our trees up off the ground when we're growing them to get air underneath them. And if you do have a little greenhouse, you'll have to make sure that there's lots of gravel in it. And you somehow got to get electricity to it. And we'll talk a little bit about why. Jackie will talk a little bit about why later. So the next thing you got to do, if you're going to grow in under cover, you're going to have to get something to grow in. And we're just showing a couple of things we grow in there. We grow in a Jiffy plug, which you see on the left. And then we grow in what they call multi-pots on your right. So you can purchase those from Jiffy or from Can-Am or Ropac. They have those containers. So if you do decide to grow a few seedlings, you can purchase those containers. So once you get your container, you got to decide what you're going to grow in. And I'm going to let Jackie take it from here on this, because you don't grow in soil in containers. You tend to grow in either a peat media or something very closely associated with it. So I'll let Jackie take the soilless media on.
So in our nursery, the most used soilless media would be called the Jiffy system, the Jiffy pellet system. There's many different types of Jiffy sizes. So we use, the most common one we use is a 3065. Now, if we're going to use the hardwall containers, we can use a mixture that's, this past year we used Pro Mix mixture with mycorrhizae. And Simply Pro Mix is a mixture of peat moss, vermiculite, perlite, with the additive of mycorrhizae in it. So essentially, in other years, we've just used peat moss and perlite and vermiculite for our containers. And I would make the mixture in our soil container light based on the type of tree you're growing, or heavy, for a black spruce. But generally, balsam fir likes a lighter soil with better aeration. So you have to keep that in mind when you're growing in a container, because as you know, as growers, balsam fir, Fraser fir, they don't like wet feet. So anyways, that's change it over. So getting into the seeding and germination. So because we do so many, we start fairly early. The end of February into March is when we seed our fir. We obviously use a heated greenhouse, and we start our seeding using our mechanical seeder. That's why I mentioned having as clean seed as you could possibly have. Fir is a sticky seed as well, so it's a little slower to even use in the mechanical seeder, but we seed everything up by the end of March when it comes to our fir. If you're going to seed yourself, you could seed, as Sean mentioned, anytime, from, February till June. And if you do like a May, June, you probably would end up having to grow into the second season. So what we try to do, because of the February seeding and March seeding, is try to do a tree in a shorter period of time. So that's why we start as early as we do. When we put the seed through the seed line, we usually put it through with 3 or 4 seeds, because balsam fir, the kind of the best germination on balsam fir is around 50-55%. Sometimes you're lucky to get 60. Our spruce comes in at 90 to 98% seed for its ability to germinate. So spruce seed's much better quality than balsam fir. And you have to keep it in mind if you're going to go through the work of picking your own seed. You could end up with seed that's got 5% germination. Sometimes it's difficult to know what you're going to end up with. So that's why when we get it cleaned, if King's Clear, what we do is we get it tested for its germination so that we have an idea of how viable the seed is. Once we seed the container, we put it in the greenhouse. We put vermiculite on the tray before we move it, with a little bit of moisture to hold the seed down, and then we put it in the greenhouse and start watering the crop. So then we'll water for, and keep the heat on for a couple of weeks, and we'll start to see the seed swelling and cracking and starting to move. So it's a bit of a slow process for germination, but yeah, it's usually within the first month you're going to start to see some seedling. So
Just if you are seeding, especially, not that we're promoting it, but if you seed outdoors, but even in the house, in your house, still lots of critters like that seed. So you may want to think about, if you do have a little greenhouse, and you may want to think about putting some bird netting up or keeping the critters out the best you can. Certainly if you have roll-up sides on your greenhouse, you'll want to put up some bird netting.
So once the trees germinate, what we do is we go through the process of thinning and transplanting. And the goal here is to get to 1 seedling per plug, essentially. So that process happens once the germination sort of completes or slows down. One of the issues with balsam is that it does lag a bit in its the seedling, the seed to germinate. And with that lagging, sometimes you end up with doubles by the end of the season. So
one thing you do want to, just to add to that, one thing you do want to make sure, if you're starting to thin, you got good germination, 3 of the 4 seeds you put in the hole, germinated. Now we got to get it down to 1 seedling. One thing you should kind of think at, you want to start and finish your thinning before the actual seedling puts lateral roots on. And what that does, it does a couple of things. Number one, by pulling, and it doesn't hurt the seedling you're leaving, but as well, it also gives you an opportunity to take that seedling with a little nail or a little device. You can actually transplant it back down in a hole that didn't germinate for you at all. So then hopefully what you'll end up with is full trays of seedlings. So just remember, if you are thinning them, or any seedling, if you are thinning, you should do it before they start to put lateral roots on.
So once the crop is in the greenhouse and you're and what we normally do is, when the seed germinates and the seed caps start coming off the seedling, I start fertilizing with a high phosphorus fertilizer. We use forestry fertilizer, plant prod, and our starter is 1141.8, we use that for about a month, and we kind of increase the level of fertilizer throughout that month, and then we transition into the growth phase of the seedling, where you really start to ramp up the growth, and then we start to use a higher nitrogen and a higher potassium fertilizer for most of the season. That's to get the growth, vegetative growth of the seedling. And so we use that fertilizer until we're ready to essentially shut the trees off for the season. And then once we shut them down for the season, I'll go into the fall and use a finisher fertilizer, which provides the nutrition that the tree needs to get through the winter. You can see on the right the dosatron. Our method of watering is actually called fertigation. We use fertilizer in our water constantly. The only time we don't have fertilizer in our water is in the fall, just before I start using the fall fertilizer to give the tree a chance to set bud and get ready for winter. We do soil tests. The reason why we start our crops early is we want to try to get them germinated, get them growing quickly, and then we keep them, as high in nitrogen as we can. And so we do regular soil tests to see where we are on that, to make sure we're not too low or too high when it comes to nitrogen and salts in the soil.
So just a question one might have is, do I need an injector to fertilize my seedlings in a greenhouse? And the quick answer is no. You could probably fertilize them by hand with granular fertilizer. But the beauty about if you did invest in an injector is that the fertilization is much more uniform and even. So that's why we do use it rather than putting fertilizer on in the granular form. So, but you could, if you had a small number of trees, you could fertilize by hands, very much like the way you fertilize your Christmas trees. But but if you're doing any amount, and to get a real even fertilizer, you need injectors. Injectors aren't that expensive if you look at a small injector.
So with any crop, you're going to have issues with weeds. So essentially, we have our weeds here too. And it's been something that we've dealt with for 25 years. The whole issue is to try to get them as early as you can, and to allow them not to compete too much with the growth of the tree, which is what you're trying to do. You don't want weeds competing for nutrition and light and everything else. So you got to stay on top of weeds. You'll see the screen on this right-hand side. This is a problem in probably every nursery that I've been to over the years. It's called liverwort. And basically it comes in your water. And we're working on a process to try to eliminate it. We've tried many things over the years, and we're still working on it. So we can update you next year on some of the trials I've been working on and be able to go from there.
Yeah. So if you're using a greenhouse to grow seedlings, you'll certainly be weeding some. So just remember that.
So diseases and insects, our main way to control diseases and insects. We've used integrated pest management here since I've started years ago. And all that's a term used to say, we're going to do everything culturally to try to keep insects and diseases and everything else at bay. And worst case scenario, when a situation happens, then you can use a pesticide in order to control a disease or an insect. So some of the diseases that we've been faced with over the years is stem rots, root rots, gray mold. It's also called botrytis. Gray mold a lot of times comes when the trees get a little taller into the fall. As stem rot and root rot can be controlled fairly well through just able to draw your seedlings back on a regular interval. When it comes to insects, you can see the insect that has probably been our kind of Achilles here for the last little while, and it seemed like it got worse over the last couple of years. It's called the leather jacket. The leather jacket is the larvae of the marsh crane fly, and you see the marsh crane flies everywhere, and you can see what it'll do to a seedling, and you'll see them everywhere. Actually, they're bad in lawns, and we have them here. We tried, and we're still trying to use biologicals to control them. And if we, if it gets to a certain situation, we have to use an insecticide. Fur likes light, and the reason why a lot of people don't grow fur, well in a 1-year cycle, is that fur likes to set bud and be done for the season. It's just the natural way that we grow. Our job at our nursery is trying to get them to not do that. So we use a lot of lights on the balsam fir, and it works fairly well. So we're trying to extend the day and keep them in their active growth phase for as long as possible. So and we'll be increasing our lights on our fir in the next year. So once the season's over, and we're getting the trees ready for shipping, we essentially, this is for the Jiffy container, so we don't have to do this for the hardwall container. We take the Jiffy and we cut their roots or root prune them, and we sort them to get them ready for shipment. So different customers have different needs, and so we try to meet the needs of the customer as best we can, the grower, and we sort the crop according to that. So we have the trees ready for winter, and we have to be able to protect them. So we have several, well, not several, maybe 3 different systems that we use. We use a overwintering blanket. We also use pallets and black-white plastic, and we also overwinter some in protected structures with white 70% opaque poly. All that does is keep the trees protected from winter burn, and keeps their roots safe from freezing and thawing damage.
At one time, nurseries in Nova Scotia counted on a lot of snow cover to protect their seedlings. They never covered anything if you turn the clock back about 30 years ago. But now in Nova Scotia, we just don't get the snow levels that we used to, and nurseries go through great efforts to protect their seedlings over the year. What you see in the slide there is just fabric, we call them blankets, but it's just thin fabric that we lay over the trees just to keep the damage from what we call winter burn, which is basically where the seedlings' roots are frozen and the wind travels over the green part of the tree and it will dry it out, and it's called winter burn. It looks real bad. So most nurseries now are covering their seedlings, and you would too, as if you had a little greenhouse of seedlings. You would have to make sure you took your seedlings off the pallets, put them on the ground, and covered them up with something such as fabric stuff that we're showing you there. Transportation, we've always told anybody that comes to our nursery, if you're taking seedlings from us, please come and make sure you come with something that you can cover your seedlings, because just remember, if you're going 100 kilometers down the road, the seedlings are getting that 100-kilometer wind. They're not used to it. They will not respond well to it. So if you're moving seedlings anywhere, just make sure they're covered some way in the back of your half-ton with something over the top, or here you see one of our trailers that we move seedlings around. It's just a trailer that's covered on top, right? So I think we have time here for just a couple of seconds on planting. Of course, what we're trying to do here is fill up our lots with good Christmas trees, good seedlings. We can grow a good seedling, or you can grow a good seedling in your greenhouse or on your property, and then it might all go bad when you go to plant it. So just a couple of tips on planting. We're asked all the time when the best time of year to plant a seedling is, and we will always respond that fall is probably the best time of year. September is probably the best month, but shortly behind that is the spring. Earlier in the spring is probably better than summer. So if you're kind of picking times, September, but I know Christmas tree growers are very busy in September, then you would look at early spring possibly, and then late spring. Problem with early spring is we seem to get later frosts now, and a young seedling out there getting hammered by frost in the early you put them out early is detrimental to the seedling. So if we were to pick it, it would be the fall, early spring, later spring, meaning June. So those would be kind of our picks. Equipment, today's seedlings are planted with just bags, as you see in that picture on the left, and a spade. We don't use any hole pipes or all those gadgets that we used to use before. We plant them with spades. It plants a very good seedling. And we're asked sometimes how shallow or how deep. Well, if you think of a tree, where you would find the roots of a tree, or if you go out in the forest and see one blowing over, the roots are always just right there where the organic matter meets the mineral soil, right? So you want to make sure your tree is down, but not too deep. And you want to make sure your tree is covered. And if you can get them there sort of between the, just at the top of the mineral soil where the bottom of the organic matter is, you probably got them in a good spot. Spacing is certainly up to yourselves. Growers are now putting trees, used to put them in at 6 feet, fair amount. In our own lots, we just sporadically plant them through our wild stands, but people are setting up plantations now and putting them in at 3 by 3, 4 by 4, whatever, hoping that they're going to cut out a little tree in the future and let one on each side go. This is something, if you take trees to the forest or to the woods, you got to water them. Trees can't go, certainly in the spring of the year, they can't go and even in September, they can't go very long without water. So you got to, if you're going to leave them out there for 2 or 3 days, you should think about watering them. And always put your trees on the best microsites. And those tend to be little hummocks in your woodlot. Like, don't put them down in a little shallow spot. Put them on the little raised hummocks in your woodlot, and you'll see better results. I think we've used our time. I know we went through a lot of information. The intention wasn't to make you guys commercial seedling growers, but hopefully you can take something from the presentation if you do decide to grow some on your own, and some part of the presentation will help you. And the pictures there are just a nice seedling that we got on one of our little lots that we planted, and we all hope to get that tree on the right there, I guess. So anyway, that's it, Jay or Jillian.
All right, thank you so much. I do have a few questions that came in during your presentation, Sean, so I'm just going to ask them to you, and you can give them a go. The first one from Darcy McDonald is: the recent surge in fir demand all due to Christmas tree growers?
Is the recent demand for fir all from Christmas tree growers? Is that the question? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And it's right in line with the price increase that Christmas tree growers are enjoying now. If we turn the clock back even 5 years ago, we wouldn't sell out all our seedlings, right? So it's a very recent demand, and it's being pushed by Christmas tree growers. Yeah.
Okay. And another one from Chloe: what are some good management practices to keep your seed orchard healthy and productive? Also, the trees that they are collecting from are around 25 to 30 feet in height. At what time will those start to become too tall to easily access? And when they do you have any advice for managing those taller trees?
Okay, a lot of questions there. So she's talking about picking cones off seed trees, whether they're in an orchard or in her own woodlot or whatever. So I like her numbers there. We used to think of seed trees years ago of big old trees that were 50 or 60 years old. Those are problematic trees because they get woolly aphid in them. They get disease and insects in them. So I like her time frame there, 25, 35-year-old seed trees. They're nice and young. They haven't got diseases and insects in them. So that's good. How do you keep them low so you can pick them, I think is part of her question. So we do top our trees, our seed trees. We start to top them a bit. We don't have an orchard. We have trees inside our woodlots where we pick trees, seed from trees, and we do top them, but it's after the trees. We just can't reach them anymore with the ladder. And when it's not safe to do so, we will start to top our seed trees. One thing we have to keep in mind is that the 1/3, the top third of a tree houses all the reproductive structures, and those include the female cones on the top and pollen cones below. But that top third of your tree has all the reproductive structures. So when we do top, we're conscious of that, and we certainly don't want to go down below a third, of course, because we'll take those out, and we will keep as much of that crown there as possible. If you do have seed orchards, there's some great expertise at some of the provincial tree breeding centers as well, who would have lots of information on how to manage those orchards.
I think that covers off the question, but if I'm wrong, Chloe, you can just unmute yourself and ask it. Oh, perfect. She says that's great. All right, another one from Darcy. Are the seedlings being planted in their second year? I guess so. How many winters are you holding them over in the nursery?
Because of this big demand, we're trying to just hold them over the 1 year. Traditionally, we've held them over 2 years at some times, certainly when the demand wasn't there. So coming out of our nursery is a 1-year-old seedling. I did talk a little bit there about putting out transplants. If you wanted a bigger solid seedling, you could take a 1-year-old seedling from us and take it out there and put it in a transplant bed and grow it for a year or two, and you'd have a very large big seedling. We have those in our own world. We don't sell them, but we plant them on our own woodlots. Yeah. I'm going to just comment one more thing there. Jackie referred to lights and nutrition, and unless you have all that going, you'll never produce a seedling in 1 year. If you decide to do something at home, you probably won't have all that stuff. So it probably will take you 2 years even to get a seedling up in a greenhouse setting.
Again, saying thank you so much to Sean and Jackie for taking the time to walk us through this. There's eons of information in there that I wouldn't have been able to put together through just research. So we really appreciate having your expertise. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions filtering in. So thanks for joining us. We'll have our next lunch break webinar session. I believe it's the last Wednesday in November. I think that falls on the 24th, but if you go ahead and register through the Zoom link, you'll get the reminder as always. And that session is going to be our yearly new entrant seminar. So if you have friends or folks that are interested in getting into Christmas tree production, that would be the lunch break to bring them along to. We're going to cover over everything in the industry, go over production and management practices, and do a bit of a high-level overview of what we need to be thinking about as new entrants. So tell your friends about that. I think most of you know where to find the Zoom registration links, but as always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me or Jillian at any time and we'll point you in the right direction. So otherwise, have a great lunch. Take care. Thanks for joining us.